Hello, everyone. Welcome to another bonus episode of Gaslit Nation, which you can watch at least the first 10-15 minutes or so in a free excerpt on our YouTube channel. You can see my dumpling Slavic cheeks that boys used to make fun of me for. They'd call me big cheeks on the playground in elementary school. And my mom would say, one day those same boys are going to ask you to prom. And she was right, they did. And I said no. But that's kind of like toxic romance, right? You gotta teach your little girls, honey, he demeans you because he loves you. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, so if you want to see my trademark Ukrainian dumpling cheeks, come on over to YouTube. They're there, spouting away. Because there is a genocide going on against Ukrainians, and I refuse to go away. I'm here. I'm speaking the truth, what needs to be said, and helping lead the way to a new livable future for my kids who are half Ukrainian, and they're going to have kids who are Ukrainian, percentage-wise. And we're going to live. We're going to all live. All of us are headed towards a livable future. I don't care what Putin thinks. I don't care what the Trump clown car thinks. I don't care what Manchin, the lobbyist of the coal industry in the Senate thinks. We are going to get through this. The theme for this bonus episode is a foreign policy for the left, putting gas station dictatorships out of business. That was the name of a early Gaslit Nation episode. And it's one of the reasons why this show exists. There are a lot of wonderful progressives who do extraordinary essential work in fighting for bringing back, establishing some sort of social safety net, undoing the hurricane level damage of the Reagan Revolution, but yet they're lacking on foreign policy. You've seen this when AOC tweeted something that she then had to delete, which was sanctions against Russia hurt Ukrainians. And Ukrainians were like, oh, no, no, no. And so foreign policy in terms of, the left, the progressives always been like seeing foreign policy, seeing support for countries like Ukraine as equivalent to what George W. Bush did with Iraq. Any moves that the US makes to try to strengthen democracies abroad, including investing in civil society, unfortunately, some of the far leftist news ecosystem has tried to paint that as CIA coup, CIA intervention, as they did with Euromaidan, Ukraine's Revolution of Dignity, which I watched closely and had to do a lot of real-time fact-checking of in terms of the Kremlin's useful idiot talking points that are making their way into the far left alternative press, the far right, and mainstream media. And so Gaslit Nation exists to say, hey, we can be progressives. We can stand for strengthening the social safety net. We absolutely must do that because people are dying. People are losing their lives. We have a decline in life expectancy in the US that is continuing. And we're losing our rights and we're going to lose our country. But we can still stand strong for other countries that are vulnerable and on the front lines of fighting fascism and corruption worldwide. And part of our efforts have to be in containing Kremlin aggression, containing Kremlin genocidal imperial aggression, and making sure that Russia loses in Ukraine, and forcing Russia into this terrorist corner of a pariah state on par with North Korea. It's so important to do that because Russia, as a mass murdering xenophobic regime, is a gas station dictatorship. And the reason why I'm opening with this is because you have a member of the Green Party. I don't know if you saw this, but there's a member of the Green Party. Let me look up her name because she's somebody that was active in the Democratic Party. She's a former Democratic House rep. And now she's a member of the Green Party and doing what the Green Party does, which is contradict itself. Here she is writing on Twitter. Cynthia McKinney, she wrote on Twitter, the most important and fundamental question you could ask yourself, how Jewish is the war against Russia? Now go to every other sector of policies that affect our lives and ask the same question. And the link she shares is by a site that's apparently ran by a Holocaust denier. And she's doing this on a social media site that is owned by Apartheid Barbie, who is attacking the Anti-Defamation League that rightfully called him out for turning what used to be known as Twitter into a viper's den of Nazis. It's now a proud, scary organizing tool for actual Nazis, trademark. And they're all parroting talking points by the Kremlin. Putin was just interviewed saying how Zelensky is the Jewish, yes, he said this, of course he said this, Zelensky is the Jewish puppet of the West, created by the West to cover up Ukraine's quote-unquote very real Nazi problem, which really does not exist. Putin's ongoing genocide in Ukraine has destroyed the homes of Holocaust survivors who have had to run down and be escorted down into bomb shelters and so on. And so there's this whole echo chamber of anti-Semitism across the far left and the far right. You see it in this sort of Russian nesting doll of anti-Semites that I just listed, from this Green Party member to Elon Musk to Putin himself. And a Green Party member spouting Russian disinformation against Ukraine. And you cannot be pro-environment and pro-Russia in any way. That's like driving a Hummer while shoving plastic straws into a turtle's nose. And that's what we have here with this person. And I bring all this up because, again, Gaslit Nation exists to say, hey, progressives, if you care about the environment deeply, you need to do everything in your power to raise your voice to support Ukraine in its fight, in its existential battle against a genocide. Russia is a gas station dictatorship that welcomes the climate crisis with open arms, because those idiots believe over in Russia that when everything burns, when everything melts, the Arctic goes away, Russia's going to turn into fertile farmland that they can then monetize. And it'll be great for Russia because Russia will have more natural resources to enrich themselves. And of course, that money is going to be, that's just a fantasy pipe dream, but that's how they see it. And their budget, of course, is based on the price of oil, is based on oil, and China's taking advantage of all that cheap oil and buying up all that cheap oil now that Russia is been heavily sanctioned by the democratic world. And the big loophole there is China then financing Russia's mass murdering regime by grabbing all of that cheap oil, and in India too, and so on. So again, to the left, to people, my fellow progressives, if you really care about the environment, you want Russia to lose this war against Ukraine. You want Russia to be contained and isolated like the terrorist regime that it is. And you want Russians, all of them, wherever they are in the world, to be forced to be part of the solution in confronting the homegrown fascism there. Because the efforts of the regime of the Kremlin spread globally, as we've seen with the rise of Trump. And that's all continuing. And so that's the sort of theme of this bonus episode. And that gets us to the first question, which inspired this week's theme, because what we're doing in this bonus episode is we're getting around to the questions we got over the summer from our listeners at our Patreon community. If you want to submit a question, support the show on Patreon, go to patreon.com/gaslit, and you can get all sorts of fun thank you gifts there for supporting our independent journalism. You'll get every single episode ad-free. You'll get all the bonus shows, access to our archives, and exclusive invites to events, and behind the scene looks at however you would say that. Sorry, I just put the kids to bed so I can be with you and have a little slumber party talk. And you'll get access to a lot of fun stuff on the show, including submitting questions for our regular Q's and A's and questions and answer sessions. And I love these questions so much because they're therapy. The stuff that is keeping you up at night, it's keeping me up at night too, I promise you. It's a really scary time for civilization, as we're seeing with all of the climate coverage that's coming out, as we're seeing with our eyes and ears. If you are, wherever you are in the world, you're likely feeling the heat, the scary record-breaking heat, and it's only going to get worse. And so we're gonna go into what does that mean for us as a civilization? Should we all just quit our jobs now and have a bunch of hedonistic sex? Should we loot stores? Should we kill the people we've always wanted to kill? Should we not have children? Should we tell our children not to have grandchildren? Because that'd be cruel to bring them into the world. So these are all the questions I'm sure some of you have, because I think about this myself. What is the point of living our everyday lives and going through these conformist motions, these sort of robotic motions that have been ingrained in us of what society means, what holding it together means, if we're all going to burn up and die and evaporate, and we're all just sort of being hit as the dinosaurs were with this asteroid of the climate crisis? What is the point now? And so we're going to talk about that and why we have reason to fight. And I'm not selling anybody hope. There's no silver lining here. If you listen to the climate scientists, if you listen to the climate activists, the organizers, the experts, they discourage hope on this front. So you're going to see news headlines where, like the New York Times did a big deep dive saying how we're that a lot of technology and other things, especially out of China, you'll hear a lot about China and advancements China is making for confronting the climate crisis. So the New York Times reported, we're actually making more headway, more progress. It's surprising how much progress there is. There is even a lot of solar power, wind energy in states like Texas. So if you see articles that seem, oh, okay, well, that's progress. It's not enough progress of where we need to be. We desperately need President Biden to call for a climate emergency, and we'll get into that in a second. And that's okay to call for that. Remember, it's okay to put pressure on our elected officials, whoever they are. I understand that people might be spooked to do that right now because the polls in the general election between Trump and Biden are so close. And yes, we have on the ballot for the presidential election in 2024, once again, democracy-ish or fascism, like full-blown Nazi regime, death camp, journalists rounded up, all of us rounded up, mass murder, people fleeing the country, fascism, right? Those are the two choices on the ballot once again in this presidential matchup for the general election. Trump, unless there's something that happens, unless Nikki Haley comes in with all of that Kushner money, all of that Kushner support, which is linked, let's just say, to Israel. That's true. The Kushners are, as we've covered on this show, Jared Kushner is very close to the Netanyahu family. And if that network somehow rallies for Nikki Haley and Nikki Haley comes in and surprises everyone and becomes the candidate, that could happen. It's unlikely, but at this where we are today, but that could always happen. We can keep our eye on that. But let's say it is a Trump-Biden matchup and Trump's going through the process of all of his a million trials and he's throwing money at all of his trials and trying to delay. He will, as we all can tell, anybody that's paying attention to his trials, he will not be in prison by the time of the vote in November 2024. We should obviously not count on that. There's movement. There are lawsuits going on to try to keep him off the ballot in some of these key states. Again, those efforts are great. I think those efforts are important, but let's just prepare for the worst, that it's going to be a Biden and Trump matchup once again, and you're going to have the Nazis who have cleaned themselves up after that sweaty, bloody nightmare that they caused on January 6th, the ones that got away or weren't able to make it that day to the coup. You're going to have them as poll monitors, election officials, canvassers. They're going to be out there beating their chests, trying to intimidate, knocking on doors. I ran into some of these guys while knocking on doors for Hillary in Florida in 2016, the nightmare that was 2016. So they're going to be out there in full force in 2024. So let's say it is that. Still, we need to put pressure on Biden to do what he needs to do for civilization. We shouldn't mute ourselves because we're scared that it's going to depress Biden's polling numbers even further.